Welcome to part two of our series called Flat World Proof for Skeptics. This is an investigative journey that those of you who are serious about finding answers in regard to where we live will hopefully get a lot out of this, because I am going to share a lot of what has been revealed to us in regard to the structure that we live on. Something that I never thought I would be investigating the way that I have, but since the investigation began about 10 years ago, the proof of the firmament was one of my favorites because it opened my eyes to how easy it is to prove the scriptures are true. And it's one of those that instantly shatters false worldly wisdom and makes you become a fool to this world, because we are told that the wisdom of this world is foolishness. And so if we step away from it, we're going to look like fools. And so I want to warn you before you watch this, we're going to show you absolute proof of this barrier throughout this series. And so I want you to understand that if you do fully put this to the test and prove all things, you're going to come to the conclusion that there is a great expanse above us, and it did not go away with the flood. And it's a structure that many are now calling the firmament. Of course, when we go back to Genesis, we will see that it had a name change, but throughout time, people have believed in this structure. Their cultures understood that there was a solid expanse above us and around us. And it's one of those things that wasn't eliminated from our minds until a few generations ago. And they did an incredible job of eliminating it from my mind, because I don't think once in my childhood did I ever picture a solid barrier up above us. I was taught initially, right away with school, that Christopher Columbus believed that we lived on a globe, and he was battling all these people who thought we would just fall off the edge, and he proved them wrong. And that was pretty easy for me to understand as a little kid, that, okay, you circumnavigate, that proves the earth is a globe. And I found out that that is nowhere near the truth when you look back at his journey. But before we get into all that, I want to go back to the beginning, where this expanse was made and how much time our Father spent with it at creation, because it's an important structure, not just one that's going to show up in the end times with Revelation. We see it making a comeback and being used, but it's the only structure that Scripture tells us was made on day two of creation, and it had a purpose, and its purpose was dividing waters from waters. And so there's literally a structure put in place that can lift water up and keep it separated from water that is down below. When I was growing up, I just thought there's moisture in the air, there's clouds, and that's probably what it was. However, we're going to see later on that's nowhere near possible, especially given that the stars and everything was placed inside it. We would not have the ability to fly through that water if there was the sun, the moon, and the stars placed right inside of it. And so right here is a quick look at what it looks like if you type in the word firmament on Bible Gateway when it's using the King James Version. And so it's only mentioned 15 times, right? Well, that would be right. But again, remember, he called the firmament heaven, and the word heaven is used 691 times. Pretty impressive. Now, what I find really fascinating about this, and I wanted to share with you guys because I think you'll find it fascinating as well, is that the word heaven is used the most times in the book of Matthew, where we have our Messiah on the scene. The person who gets second place for the most uses of the word heaven is David here in the book of Psalms, 73 times. And where this gets really interesting is that if you add in the word firmament that he used twice, it's a tie, 75, 75. And so it is a significant structure. Our Messiah used it many, many times, and the one who prophetically foreshadowed his coming, King David, used it nearly equally the amount of times as our Messiah did, as documented in the book of Matthew. And so, extremely important this structure is. And when we start looking at the meaning of the word firmament and the word heaven and all of that, we see that not only Isaiah telling us that it's spread out like a tent, the heavens are, we have the word itself coming from the Hebrew word raka, which literally means to beat, stamp, beat out, or spread out. And when I hear those words, I picture a blacksmith with a hammer beating out and spreading out a metal surface, a solid surface. Not something you would do with a vacuum, But there are people and translations out there that will push that idea that he spread out space, that he used space to hold up water. This is a literal translation. This is the easy to read translation, and I think it's the easy to indoctrinate translation because they say that he said, "Let there be a space," and that he made the space. Why would he need an entire day of creation to make a vacuum? What was the world inside of before space? If we're in space and there was no space, where was Earth? What was it circling around at 66,600 miles per hour before he made the firmament? Was he on some little roller coaster ride while he was creating? What was going on back then? Well, according to this translation, he spent an entire day making space. But when we look at a translation where someone actually understood the words in their original Hebrew language, they use words like dome to talk about the firmament. And this is the complete Jewish Bible. You can find this on Bible Gateway. And right here, when you look at it, it says, God said, "Let there be a dome in the middle of the waters, and let it divide the water from the water." God made the dome and divided the water under the dome from the water above the dome. And so the visual you get becomes quite different than what I grew up with. And so it's important to understand the meanings of these words when we're going into this investigation. It's going to get scientific. We're not just going to believe this and move on. We're going to prove that it's still there. But it's important to understand the entirety of this structure because it comes back into effect on day 4 of creation, where our Father is now setting lights in the heavens. He makes the sun, He makes the moon, and He makes the stars, and He puts them in the heavens for a reason, and it's for signs and appointed times. And these lights, of course, having a greater light to rule the day, known as the sun, and a lesser light to rule the night, known as the moon, and the stars also, these things have their hierarchy, where the sun is brighter, the moon is not as bright, and the stars even more dim than the moon. And so, with that said, you look at worldly wisdom, what do they tell us? They tell us that our sun is just a star. And it's not any star, it is a dwarf star, this puny little star, not the greater light. So they're already going against biblical truth, telling us that the sun is a lesser light and it's even lesser than the stars that he made. And so they are putting now not only the sun at the center of creation, and taking us out of the center of creation, they're making the sun a lesser light and telling us that the stars are going to look like the sun if we can zoom in on them. Problem is, anytime we've ever zoomed in on the stars, they never look anything like suns. Even the clearest photos of the stars that you can find, which there's none out there, that look anything like a sun, it looks something like this. And then you find out these aren't even photos. This is just data that they have used to make images. And so, no matter what we believe about these things from our small perspective on this earth, it's hard to really prove one way or the other. And that's why it's easy to lie about these things because they are extremely high up and hard to really focus on. And a lot of time, out of focus star footage will get passed off as what these things really look like. When you adjust the focus, you can get a better look at these things, but never have I ever seen one looking like their computer animated suns or the real sun that we can look at with solar filters. But either way, according to Scripture, we know that these lights are in the heavens or in the firmament. And this structure was working as designed until an important event, one that we read about in Genesis, where the world needed to be cleansed, kind of like a baptism here for the world, where it was corrupted. And we see that the windows of heaven were opened. And remember, he called the firmament heaven. And so we have the windows of the firmament being opened. And the word window here was one that I had to go back and look up in my early days of this investigation because we see it being used when Noah is making the ark and we see it used with the heavens. And when you look at the original meaning of that word, it's two different words. You have Sohar and you have Aruba. And with the word Aruba, it gives us some descriptions, and one of those is a lattice. And it says by implication, a window, a dovecot, because of the pigeonholes, chimney with its apertures for smoke, a sluice in bold right here with openings for water. And I thought, wow, those are some interesting descriptions. A sluice, what is that? Because I don't use sluices very often. And I looked up the word sluice, and it gives you imagery like you see here on the right, where you have an apparatus designed to hold back waters. Imagine that. The firmament itself designed to hold back waters, and there are floodgates or windows in the heavens that can open like a sluice and let water out. So this would be a way that you could have those waters that were separated and lifted up above the firmament coming down. You also see similar descriptions with a chimney, where a chimney actually has a mechanism called a damper and a smoke shelf here that are designed to help regulate the flow of smoke. And so if you close the damper and light a fire, the smoke will come into your house. I've actually seen that happen before. It's quite scary when the smoke starts coming out and you don't realize there's a damper there. Someone knows how to open it. They can save the day because that smoke will flow uphill and it will come out the top of the chimney as it's designed to do. And so that's kind of like a visual there of what the floodgates could have been like, sort of a damper tool here. They can open and close, kind of like a sluice. And you also see the dovecot with the pigeonholes aspect. And so right here you see a device stuck to the side of a wall with holes in it, and the pigeons can go in and out, similar to how the water can go in and out of the windows of the heavens. And so the visual descriptions make you believe that there is a solid structure. Otherwise, you wouldn't have windows attached to it. You can't attach windows to deep space. And they say gravity turns everything into spheres, so you just have a big spherical orb of water up there somewhere, and it would all come down all at once. But on the biblical earth model, there would be windows up above us, and we see in certain texts like Jubilees that there would be seven floodgates or seven windows of heaven that were opened and seven fountains of the deep. Why does this make sense? Well, Mr. Christopher Columbus, when he was trying to get funding, he quoted a book that was in the original King James. It was two Esdras, also known as the fourth book of Ezra. And Mr. Columbus, although he didn't have access to the King James, this was prior to the King James era, he was familiar with that text. And this text talks about six parts of the world being dried up, one of them being the waters, the gathering together of the waters or the seas. And this was ahead of its time. You're talking about the late 1400s, and their globes only had 4 to 5 continents on them. It wasn't until the mid 1900s, according to Google, that globes started having 7 continents. So we see, as always, scriptures being way ahead of their time. But a lot of people, including me, when we picture the flood, we picture waters going up and waters coming down. Rarely have I ever known anyone, including myself, picture water covering a globe with an ark on it, and that ark just floating around aimlessly on a ball of water. Never have I ever pictured that, and I think it's because our brains know reality without us telling it what's going on. We can see flat water rising and going back down. Spherical water rising and going back down is something I have never even imagined. Even when I believed in the globe, I didn't picture something like this. And remember, almost 500,000 miles per hour, you're getting this water show or water spraying in at all these different angles. And so, to save the day, to help save the globe, a lot of people ask, where did this water come from? What's going on? And now you have people that are battling biblical cosmology and inventing theories like the ice canopy theory. And this theory states that there was a firmament, just like Genesis says, but it was temporary. It was an ice canopy, and that it broke away with the flood. And then you had this ball of water. Problem is, on their ball of water, before the ice canopy broke, if we're circling the sun and we're in an ice canopy and there's water on the other side, we're in a submarine. That would have put the sun out if the sun was underwater, because we're flying around in water on this spaceship called Earth with an ice canopy. There's no glorified way to make that work because you're now in a submarine that has pressure so great. The pre-flood world would have been under a lot of pressure. If you could imagine how much water it would take to surround the entire ice canopy. And so the ice canopy theory to me is one that I feel, if we go back to, its invention, I think it was Dr. Kent Hovind who suggested that theory. And back then I had a lot of compassion for people like that because I felt like, they're doing the best they can with the information they have. And he even said at the beginning of his presentation that he could be wrong. And I admired that kind of humbleness. But now there has been a shift, and people are attacking biblical cosmology, not realizing that it has these answers. And the globe model doesn't have answers. When it comes to that flood water, where would it go? On a ball of magma. And this is why atheists laugh at creationists who believe in the globe, because there's nowhere for it to go. The globe has us on a magma ball that has a pressurized atmosphere and a vacuum. And I could imagine why people would have a hard time taking us seriously if they already believe in this model. It's far from what we are seeing. And that so-called ice canopy theory falls apart when you actually look at what our Messiah says and the prophets say, and they see things that are future events. And they're seeing that the firmament called heaven is opening up when the return happens. And this is something only possible if it's still there. It would not need to open if it was an ice canopy that broke away. We even see that when the beloved Son was being baptized, the heavens open, and our Father says, "This is my beloved Son." No one there stopped and said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, what's going on? Time out. I thought the ice canopy fell away." No, they understood what was there. They understood the heavens were above them. John understood that. Our Messiah, of course, understood that because he went directly up through the firmament, the different layers to get to the Most High. And so we see Isaiah and John in Revelation speaking of that same barrier. And how do they describe it? Well, all you got to do is go to Bible Gateway and type in the word scroll. It'll pull up Isaiah 34, verse 4, and Revelation 6:14, where they are talking about the same event, the host of heaven being dissolved, and the heavens, it's plural there, I find that fascinating, rolling together as a scroll. We see that visualization given in both of their accounts. So you have two witnesses to the same event, and you see stars falling down, something that even our Messiah witnesses to, someone whose words we will be held accountable for if we do not believe and listen to them. And so those words are important. And when we look to Malachi, we see that there is a present tense version of the heavens being there, the windows at least, the windows of heavens, which would be attached to the heavens. And our Father in Malachi says here, "Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house. And prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven, and pour you out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough to receive it." And so he's speaking of his windows of heaven as if they're still there. And this pouring out of a blessing aspect, something that is real. And so that is the biblical descriptions of the heavens, at least the basic summary I can give. There's greater detail I can go into, but I know that people want to see what we're talking about. They want to actually witness this structure, because if it's still there, somebody's witnessed it, right? As a lot of people say, why don't we just go there? Why don't we just walk to the edge and find it? So that is another part of this journey. But I want you guys to see it. We don't have to break the Antarctic Treaty to see it. We can go and find footage of it, which you're about to see. But before we look at this footage, I want to show you some important prophecies about how this barrier was hidden and the text that helped me realize how it is we can see it. And so it's something our Father is using now in these last days to wake up a lot of people. And the prophecy that I believe tells us directly how the deception of the heliocentric model would come about is in the book of Enoch, chapter 80. And like it or hate it, there's things in Scripture that are only found in this book. And so we're going to see here that Enoch is being shown that many chiefs of the stars shall transgress the order prescribed. Meaning, they were put into the heavens for signs and appointed times. Some of them are going to change their order that was given to them. And it says that they shall alter their orbits and tasks. I find it cool that he used the word orbits here, and not appear at these seasons or appointed times prescribed to them. And so the sky clock would have been way easier to read before this happened. And he tells us that the whole order of the stars shall be concealed from the sinners, and the thoughts of those on earth shall err concerning them. As in, we literally take the greater light to rule the day to be a little dwarf star. And they shall be altered from all their ways. And so these chiefs of the stars, I believe those are what we now call planets. And he says, Yea, they shall err and take them to be gods, and evil shall be multiplied upon them. And now we see all the planets named after false Roman deities, except for Earth, which they say is a planet, and it's just dry land according to Genesis, like we saw in part one of this series. And so we're not even supposed to be uttering their names to give them glory and to bow down and worship them and make graven images of them and all the things that people are doing now. We're told to make graven images of these chief stars and to speak their names a certain way from the time we are young and in school. And I could remember doing this. I remember singing the songs with these names with joy and thinking I remembered the order of the planets and where I was and being so happy to have this wisdom. And we're seeing that we're not supposed to do that. And the book that warned us that this would happen gives us descriptions about something that sounds like science fiction because he says on his tour of the biblical earth, another phenomenon I saw in regard to the lightnings, plural, how some of the stars arise and become lightnings and cannot part with their new form. This reminded me of a phenomenon that is fairly new in the science world to be studied, known as lightning sprites. Now, remember, the sky above us, guys, does have electric properties. As you increase in elevation and get closer, you're going to increase in the electric charges around you greatly. And so there is something above us that has a charge. Seems to be a very powerful charge, and so much so that it can create a plasma phenomenon that generates billions of volts of electricity. And according to scientists, these lightning sprites are essentially large electrical discharges made up of plasma. And so these lightning sprite events happening where they estimate to be anywhere between 60 to 100 miles, I think they're further. That's just my theory. And we see that with their worldly wisdom, they give us all these layers of air that they say is curved. And so they throw on the word sphere to all those different layers with their elevation and their sizes given with worldly wisdom. We're going to use worldly wisdom. They're still massive, larger than Mount Everest. I'm going to show you right here. You can look and see. This is as much to scale as I could get at Mount Everest compared to a lightning sprite. If it's the size they say. Again, I think they're a little higher and a little larger, but clouds are about 2.8 miles. So what you're seeing up here is not clouds. These things do not come from clouds. People think that all the time, but we have to understand clouds go nowhere near those heights. And so even if they were at 60 miles even, clouds aren't up there. They are coming down from far greater heights than the clouds. And this is where we're about to see this phenomenon actually light up and reveal the heavens because it is using what is by necessity a closed system. Because we can produce a similar phenomenon to lightning sprites. Problem is, when we do, what do? We use a barrier. It's called a Labine plasma ball lamp or a plasma ball lamp. And these lamps were very popular. You can still buy them online. They are ones that will work great. Turn them on, they work. You touch them, you can interfere with the electricity on the other side of the insulative glass barrier. But what happens if you break it? Well, you break that barrier even slightly and there are no more lightning sprites, no more plasma phenomenon going on here with these plasma ball lamps. And so this is something people have experimented with. You can buy yourself a plasma ball lamp, wear safety glasses, destroy the outer barrier, and you'll see this thing stops working instantly. The King of Random did this years ago. Thankful for his work. Things aren't random. He might have thought that was random, but it shows us that a barrier is required. And this barrier replicates lightning sprites masterfully, where you have different charges separated by a barrier. And it's one that you can interact with. So remember, Enoch says stars rising up, not losing their form, and helping to become lightning sprites. Well, you can touch the top of one of those barriers and help make these lightning sprites become more vivid and your hand doesn't go away. And so these powerful, powerful bursts of electricity have been captured now in great detail. We have released videos of this before where we talk about them being filmed, and the footage is phenomenal. I'm going to show you here some looks at what happens when people fly above the clouds and point their cameras upwards towards the firmament. And what they see is not deep space. There are waves moving across this barrier before these lightning sprites shoot down. You can even see a star twinkle right before they send the ripple across the heavens. There's the stars lit up right there. And that wave moves just like a wave in the ocean, only it's upside down. And so that barrier up above us, what those materials are that are generating that wave, is it waters? I used to think it was waters that were separated from the waters above, but it could just be the gathering of these lightweight gases that are way less dense than the air we breathe. Who knows what it is? It could just be part of the structure itself, but it looks to be somewhat fluid and able to be moved and absorb an impact. The firmament has a unique design. It has electric properties. You can see it here. I've inverted it so you can see how much it actually looks like the waves in the ocean. And if I had no one telling me what this is, I would think there were ocean waves and fireworks being fired up out of the water. And so, to further solidify my observations, I compared it to a geyser and I inverted the footage, of course, so you can see the similarities. On the left, you have the sprites. On the right, you have the geyser where waters are shooting out of the ground, and it looks almost identical to these lightning sprites. And so there is a barrier up above us. We can see that. It becomes visible when we go up above a storm and use cameras that can capture these things, and we can slow it down because they happen fast. And when we're filming them from ground level with regular cameras, it's hard to capture this detail. But fortunately, people risked their lives going up above a storm to film this. They put it out there, we shared it, it went viral, and then they deleted their footage. And so it was actually aired on PBS and filmed by Nova. And in spite of this footage being historic, one of a kind, they took it down. And so you're able to see the firmament there, the waves moving across it. But why is it that we can't just go up above most of our so-called atmosphere and see the firmament? Why does it look black when we go up there during the daytime? Shouldn't it look like this? Well, that's what I would have thought. But when we go back to the book of Isaiah, we find answers that are again thousands of years ahead of their time. Because Isaiah here, speaking in prophecy, says, from our Father's perspective, I clothe the heavens with blackness, and I make sackcloth their covering. This is something we didn't realize until the mid 1900s when we were sending up cameras and real people above those layers of atmosphere. And they will talk about them going up above this blue layer and they get up above it and then it's just this blackness and it's really cool seeing that. And they have footage of it now. You can actually look up high altitude balloon footage, and this is filmed quite often. You will see a few little dots of light up in the heavens even when it's daytime, but it doesn't look like this. And it was foretold in the book of Isaiah, something that is, again, thousands of years ahead of its time, because only now have we had the technology for your average person to do this and verify it. Don't have to be a space agency to do it. Just buy a weather balloon, launch it, attach a camera to it. If you can get it up there, 100,000 feet, 120,000 feet, you're going to see that boundary line between the black and the blue. And so that's why it's not easy during the day to just go up and point a camera forward and see it. But there's another aspect of the heavens and the measurements I want to talk about because I want to correct myself. I've spoken, and when I'm reading scriptures, usually I just would back in the day use the Masoretic manuscripts, but I'm finding different meanings when I use the much older Septuagint, especially when it comes to Jeremiah. This is a book that I highly encourage you to go to the Septuagint with when you're reading it and compare because there are some major differences. And one of those is with Jeremiah 31:37. It actually lines up a little differently with Jeremiah in the Septuagint, and some of them it's chapter 38. And so the Masoretic version sounded pretty harsh, and I want to read it. It says here, Thus saith Jehovah, if heaven above can be measured, and the foundations of the earth searched out beneath, I will also cast off all the seed of Israel for all that they have done, saith Jehovah. And so, with that being said, I thought that if we were to measure it, he would just get rid of us. That's kind of how that sounds, right? Well, the Septuagint sounds totally different. It says here, if the sky were raised up even higher, declares the Lord, and the foundation of the earth lowered downward, even then I would not reject the race of Israel, declares the Lord, concerning all the things they have done. This is a mercy scenario that even if we could, let's think Operation Fishbowl, we have some evil people trying to blow up the heavens, Tower of Babel type stuff going on there. He hasn't wiped us all out with another flood. He hasn't cast us all aside. And so I do want to correct myself. I think the Septuagint has that better. And with that said, I still think that this kind of shows us that the heavens are vast. And if the Masoretic is correct, we shouldn't be trying to get these measurements from the foundations of the earth, trying to dig down below Sheol. And those aren't things that we should be trying to do. But his mercy does endure forever. And if we were to, heaven forbid, raise up the heavens a little bit or lower the foundations of the earth downward, like it says here in the Septuagint version, then he would not cast off all of Israel for the things they have done. That is important to understand, but it's also important to use things we can do in the lab to prove that the barrier above us is at work. And we can see that when we look at something as simple as rainbows and the experiments that we use to make them in the lab, because typically you need a light source, water, and some sort of barrier or mirror device to create a rainbow indoors. Of course, outdoors you don't need that because the light source is already shining through a barrier, but we definitely see that in the lab, the barrier and the shape of it will impact the shape. And with this understanding, as I'm thinking about this last year doing my creation standard lessons, I just wondered, would the rainbows be a different shape in the south because the light is above the firmament and the firmament shape towards the outer edges, of course, its shape might be very similar, but it's going to be lower to the ground. Would that impact the shape of the rainbows as you go south? And after more than a year of compiling images and looking up averages, we have found that there is truth to this, that the rainbow's shape does change. Of course, the sun's angle does play a part, but on average, the sun is said to go as far north as it does south. And so, with that said, the height change on average should be identical in the north and in the south because the sun's angles should be identical and mirrored in the north and in the south. And so, if the firmament is lower in the south on the biblical earth, that would make sense as to why rainbows are shorter in the south. On the globe model, there should be no difference, but we have found time and time again when we do image searches that unless people are just being biased and only filming short rainbows in the south, they're predominantly shorter in the south. And not always, sometimes the sun position in the firmament will be different and it will make the rainbows look different. But on average, if you're going through and looking up pictures in the south, you're going to find the shortest ones you've seen in the south, the tallest ones in the north, and the ones in the north, they get taller. This is Canada. There's some even further north that get even taller than this, but I couldn't fit it on the screen very well, so I used one in Canada. They get really tall and they even have more of a double rainbow aspect up north than they do in the south, which I find that also extremely fascinating. And these really short ones are even thicker in the south. So you have thicker, shorter rainbows in the south, the thinner, taller ones up in the north. And when we find videos where people are trying to replicate rainbows in the lab, here's one where they are indoors trying to make a rainbow. And he's trying to figure out why it's curved because his son asked him that question. I don't think it was random, but it made him really work hard to investigate this. And so what does he do? He gets a barrier, dome shaped, shines a light through it, and replicates the rainbow. Of course, the shape of his barrier is why you get the shape of this rainbow. And he does a really good job of showing us how it separates the light underneath from the darkness above. That's what rainbows do in reality. The only difference is he's got a single rainbow. For a double rainbow, you would need to use a different type of barrier, most likely one that is multi-layered. So I would like to see him go back to the lab and create a double rainbow, something maybe you guys can do now that you know the ingredients needed and starting to see that we most likely have a multi-layered firmament up above us. And it's one that the different layers will play into observations we have on Earth when it comes to sun and moon and star observations. And this notion is nothing new. This is something that's been dated as far back as the Dead Sea Scrolls with the Testament of Levi here, where we even see renderings of a multi-layered firmament and they match that 7 layer description mentioned in the Testament of Levi. And even Paul talks about layers. In Second Corinthians, he wasn't talking about the layers of the atmosphere. He was talking about the third heaven and having someone that he knew or was in union with the Messiah, who 14 years ago, he says, just as matter of fact as ever, was snatched up to the third heaven. And when I looked up the complete Jewish Bible version of this, it tells us that he was snatched up to Gan Eden. And I thought, what is that? You look up that word, it's paradise, the Garden of Eden, located in the third heaven. And so the Garden of Eden, paradise, going to be making a comeback. We're going to have the tree of life down here when the return happens. And so we see these things in our Father's gospel message playing out, part of the gospel of the kingdom. And so when people say this is a divide and it's not worth talking about, they talked about it. And people weren't divided. They believed it back then. The deception was already underway. There were, of course, people I'm sure back then who believed they were standing upside down and all of that, but they weren't debating it. The people who believed in Scripture weren't sitting down and having debates. They told them to avoid the false science. And that's why when we see Mr. Copernicus come along, he tells us that he doesn't care what people who believe in the Bible say. He disregards them. And so we need to stick with what our Father and his prophets and his Son tell us about the heavens. And we need to put that to the test, because when we do, we're going to continue to see visual evidence that there's a barrier there, even with things like sun halos that do have to do, of course, a lot with the ice crystals in the air and things like that. But they require a barrier. If you're going to make something like this in the lab, you're going to see you can't just take ice crystals in the air and a light source and make something this magnificent. People have tried and failed to make something like that in the lab without some sort of barrier. Can't do it. But here is what a device looks like that can replicate that in the lab. What does it have? Well, it has a crystalline type of barrier with a light source in it, and the shape dictates the shape of the sun rays. Right here, look at all these light rays. It's not exact, but it does do the job slightly, enough to where you realize if they adjusted the shape of the barrier properly, they could get exact replicas of things like this. That's what they're trying to do. They're not using ice crystals in the air. They're using a barrier with a light within it. And so the firmament is provably there. And it doesn't just show up when there's lightning sprites. People have filmed many, many times waves moving across the luminaries. Not just the moon, also Jupiter here, the chief star that I believe Enoch was talking about that was going to change its path. Waves moving across it. Here it's in focus. The exposure has been adjusted, and you can see it as clear as day. That's not deep space warping or gravity changing or anything like that. That is waves moving across the moon, waves moving across these luminaries. This is because we have a barrier. There was no atmospheric distortions. There were no airplanes causing this. These have been filmed time and time again, predominantly during equinoxes, which I find fascinating. But according to the Book of Enoch, the sun and moon have gates. And so these would happen in a mathematical way. As they change their gates, I believe you're seeing this phenomenon. And it would happen 6 times in the first half of the year and 6 times in the latter half, because you have 6 gates total on each side, east and the west. And the going all the way through the 6 gates and back is what gives us our 12 months of the year. And so lunar waves being associated with that aspect, I believe we've gone in great detail on that. I don't want to go through that all again. That's an entirely different video and worth researching and looking into. But that barrier being up above us, you think scientists would have detected it if it's there, right? Well, they have. They've detected a barrier up above us. Back around 2014, scientists were talking about a Star Trek-like invisible shield they detected thousands of miles above Earth. Their signals weren't going through it. They were confused. Well, this is where NASA came in to help and said, guys, don't worry about it. It's a man-made bubble surrounding Earth. And people were buying it. They even said that their Van Allen probes, of course, the Van Allen belts were invented to be a reason why we couldn't go back to the moon for a while until now. Somehow we found the technology. But the humans, they say, are the ones who put it here. It's not a God-made barrier that these scientists were detecting. It's a man-made bubble surrounding the Earth. And so they're now giving man credit for a barrier that signals can bounce off of. And we know that man did not make this barrier. Our Father made it. Man has tried to hide it. They have worked together peacefully. And that's one thing you'll notice. The ones who are telling the lies are peaceful with each other. They're not divided. They're trying to divide us. And we need to be prepared because this barrier, when it parts like a scroll, these liars and deceivers who are false teachers and witnessing a version of creation that goes against our Father, His Son, and the prophets, they're going to be humbled. And if we believe just a few of their lies, it could trip us up in the long run. And so we need to have our faith in our Father and what He tells us His creation is like. He will never steer us wrong. Hold on to His truth because it is getting very deceptive out there. The alien files are being released and people are just buying it. We have to go out there and teach them these things so that they understand these deceptions are demonic. They're going to try to bring about lawlessness and godlessness, this form of atheism and trust in science to a degree that we have yet to see. And it all banks on us believing in their demonic lies, lies that even in Aleister Crowley's book were spoken by the demons themselves when they said they were going to bring the glory of the stars to the hearts of men. And that's why we now have Star Wars, Star Trek, Hollywood stars, rock stars, superstars, star students, you name it. They want us making wishes on stars. They don't want us praying to the creator of heaven and earth, the one who literally set the stars in the firmament. They want to make it about those little lights. They want you to glory in them. And so we're going to take the glory. That is our mission as his children to bring the glory back to our Father. And so that's my goal with this series is to bring people away from the blinding false science that has robbed so many of the joy of getting to know who our Father is. It's something that we aren't told about, but it is making a difference in so many lives. And so I hope this has been clear in pointing out the firmament that it's still there so that you can see that our Father and His love and His mercy is still there. His prophetic timeline is still there. Things are going as foretold in Scripture. And so we need to be ready. I thank you guys for uniting with us on this cause, helping us share this, even though it brings you ridicule and persecution and all those things that our Messiah told us would happen. Have great joy. Remember you're blessed when those things are happening, and that is hard to remember because it doesn't sound like a blessing having people say things against you falsely, and it's tough, especially when it's people that you love. But remember, pray for them. They are under great delusions and deceptions. And so that is it. You guys are beloved creations of the Most High. I hope this really has impacted you in some way or given you some extra evidence to share with those out there in the world. Along with this presentation, it's going to be in the description. You guys can use it, take screenshots, and put it out there, help your studies as well. Thanks again for all your support. If you want to join us and become a supporter, I encourage you to do so. All of our supporters are able to join our weekly studies, and they have been a blessing. And so for information on that, you can also go down to the description, and we will see you next time.